Alright, Shalom Hebrews. Shalom Hebrews. This is a message from the Israelite Brotherhood. Alright, Israelites, when we read in Deuteronomy 28, 68, and in the King James Version, it say that the Israelites will be taken back to Egypt in ships. Alright, if you read in Tanakh, in the Tanakh history, man, it reads, man, a little different. Man, it reads a little different. And I'm going to read it, and it's best to read it from the Tanakh, because then you can see the actual truth, and then, you can match prophecy with history, that you can see, but we know with common sense that the Israelites from the promised land wasn't took to Egypt, ancient Egypt, Mesrim, in ships, because we ran there. We ran there to do the Egyptian religion, so we wasn't took there in ships. And while we was in Africa, it wasn't no way to take us there in ships, because we was already there from running there during the Babylonian wars to do Egyptian religion. But I want to show this, and then I'm going to show you the history of the ships that it was talking about, and it actually took place. It actually took place. So when Almighty y'all say something gonna happen, you best believe that it's gonna happen just like He said. Alright, let's go to Deuteronomy 28, and then we'll go to 68. And it says, the Elohim will send you back to Egypt in galleys by a route which I told you you should not see again. And there ye shall offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but none will buy you. And when it say none will buy you, that's basically saying that, in ancient times when we was invaded or we was in trouble, that we can offer gold up to our captors, and then that'll set us free. Man, it happened in King Hezekiah's time and King Jehoahaz's time. I'm going to read those scriptures where when the enemy fell up on us, that the Israelites was able to buy themselves out of bondage. But this time we wouldn't be able to buy ourselves out of bondage. And then also, we offer ourselves as slaves, the males and the females today, when we get jobs by our captors and we have to work for them and so forth, whereas Almighty Yah gave us land and we was basically working for ourselves. So we been slaves just like Tanakh say. But let's read this over. Look, this is Deuteronomy 28:68. The Elohim will send you back to Egypt in galleys. Look, in galleys. Alright. In the King James Version, let's see what it has. Let's see what it has in the King James Version. In the King James Version, man, it's going to read a little different. Man, it says, this is Deuteronomy 28. And the Elohim shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. Well, it's basically, ships is basically the same, but it's a little different if you understand the history. Alright, those are galleys. A galley is when a slave had to roll the ship. And that happened, that we rolled the ships because sometimes, man, the ship couldn't come all the way into harbor, man, unless that land, especially when they first brung us to a land that we had to build the harbors and build the docks. Well, man, before then, man, the slave ship had to roll up to the dock because the water was shallow as you get close to the shore. Man, it was shallow. So we know that the slave owners didn't roll the slaves up to shore, and that the slaves were forced, the captured Israelites were forced to roll the ships, roll the galleys up to the coast, and then, they would disembark and then be sold. That happened, man, all the time, just about in 75% of the times when the Israelites was brung to America or captivity, Egypt in the West, that, we had to roll the ships, man, because we know the slave captures didn't roll no ships, you know what I'm saying, after putting the slaves on them, and then the slaves roll up to shore after getting off the slave ship. We know that didn't happen. We know that didn't happen, and our captors don't get down like that. That they made the slaves do all the work. So the slaves were forced to row the galleys up to the shore after getting off the big ship, and then they put us on the little ship, and then we would roll up, man, to shore, and then the slaves would get off, man, and be sold in. But the big ship, the big tonnage ships couldn't come into the harbor or close to shore because they can get stuck. So they took the little galley ships that was using oars, and then the slaves had to oar the galleys up close, to the shore, or take products back out to the big ship, because the big ship couldn't come into dock. Man, it couldn't come into harbor like this right here. This is a prime example. That ship couldn't come all the way up to the coast, and that it took a little bitty ship that would require oar, but because it didn't have the sail to, sail that little small distance, and 100% of the time they would have the slaves to do the work. All manual work was done by slaves. So, that prophecy come to pass. So it's no mistake, and we know that the Israelites went into Africa, Egypt, from that little small distance, that it wouldn't make no sense, to roll a boat, you know what I'm saying, or to sail from that short distance, man, to Egypt, and that the Tanakh show that we ran into Egypt, to do the Egyptian religion. And then this is another thing that I want to point out, is that when the Tanakh say that we'll be taken to Egypt, we know that America is that Egypt. Well, the Western Hemisphere is that Egypt, and that, many do the same things that ancient Egypt did to us. It made us labor. We labored for a long time for free, and still basically doing it, and that we was in bondage horribly in Egypt, and that the Egyptians changed our names. You know what I'm saying? That's like when our father Joseph was in Egypt, and it did how the Egyptians changed his name. They changed your name. You know what I'm saying? In Egypt, in bondage, and then that's what they did to us Israelites. They changed our names. Look here. And Pharaoh called Joseph. This would be Genesis 41:45. And Pharaoh called Joseph name Zappaneah Panini, and he gave him to wife Asenath. You see what I'm saying? So we know ancient Egypt didn't want to let us go. That's like in America, since they so-called freed us. We know that any nation that's supposed to have freed people that they had in bondage would basically take them back to the land where they're from, and then see them off well, and get them a star because they done freed them, and they would repatriate us to the lands that they captured us from. How about this place ain't did that. That America ain't did that, and that America been trying to hold on us for the longest, been holding on us, been holding on to our people for the longest, and refuse to let us go. And then they make us participate in their wars. Man, they teach us to help enslave and oppress our own kind. And then like the Israelites were fussing and fighting in Egypt, man, we doing the same thing here to each other. So, it's like the medical practices and everything that ancient Egypt had. We know that America is identical and used the same practices ancient Egypt had. In the plagues that was on the people in Egypt, it is on the people now, and that the Egyptians did scientific research on creating diseases and things that they could put on a captured people, and it's the same for us here. But the most important thing is that the Egyptians didn't want us to worship Yah, and that how that they wanted us to worship their gods, and we succumbed to their gods when we was eventually chased out the promised land for worshiping their gods. And then you will see that in the book of Jeremiah. When you go to chapter that'll be chapter 40, 43, I think, or 44. That'll be chapter 44. And then you'll see how that we went into Egypt, man, to do the Egyptian religion, stiff-necked and blind to the prophecies that Almighty Yah had made when He freed us from Egypt. He outlined to us when He gave us the covenant what will happen to us if we disobeyed the law. And that'll be Deuteronomy 28. But this is us going to Egypt, showing that we was never took into ancient Egypt in ships, but that we ran there, meant to do the Egyptian religion. All right, man. If you go to Jeremiah 44, and then you get down to 15, then all the men which knew that their wives had burnt incense unto other gods, and all the women that stood by in great multitude, even all the people that dwelled in the land of Egypt and Pathros, answered Jeremiah, saying, as for the word that thou hast spoken to us in the name of the Elohim, we will not hearken unto thee, and we will certainly do so whatever thing go forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the Queen of Heaven, and pour out drink offerings unto her, as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings, our princes, in cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then had we plenty of victuals, food, and were well, and saw no evil. But since we left off to burn incense unto the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, we have wanted all things, and have been consumed by the sword and by famine. So we went into Egypt willingly. So we wasn't took into the Egypt or an Egyptian system, which mean bondage, until we was captured in Africa and brought to the transatlantic slave trade. And then we was forced to row the boats, the galleys that took us to shore from the big ships that couldn't come into the harbor because the harbors wasn't deep enough. You see what I'm saying? So, the Tanakh is right on time when it tell you, the curses and the things that will happen to the Israelites. The prophecies are on time. So when our enemies try to say, well, y'all didn't go to Egypt in ships. Well, we was done just like Tanakh said, that we will be taken in galleys. Galleys is when you row yourself up to the shore. And then that's what we did. We was taken off the big ships that couldn't come into the harbor. Couldn't come into the harbor because the water wasn't deep enough for the ships to come in. They'll get stuck and then get towed up. The bottom of it to get towed out. So then they had to be anchored a little farther distance from the shore, and then they got on gullies, and then they would load the slaves up on gullies and then roll them to shore. And then that's what happened to us Israelites. Identical, man, to what Tanakh say. So when the folks say, oh, y'all wasn't taken to Egypt in ships, yeah, we were. We was taken to bondage in gullies, just like Tanakh said. So we can't let them try to undermine that. We can't let them try to undermine that, because you see that in the Tanakh, and it's plain and clear. And then when it says no one will buy you, meaning that we couldn't get redeemed from our bondage, meaning go to I think that'd be Second Kings 18, 2 Kings 18:13, and let's see what it say. 2 Kings 18:13, and then we're gonna read this out the Tanakh. All right. 2 Kings 18:13. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, King Sennacherib of Assyria marched against all the fortified towns of Judah and seized them. King Hezekiah sent this message to the king of Assyria: I have done wrong, and withdraw from me, and I shall bear whatever you impose on me. So the king of Assyria imposed upon Hezekiah of Judah a payment, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. And Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was in the hand of the house of the Elohim and the treasures of the palace. You know what I'm saying? So, he was able to buy us off, but wasn't nobody able to pay our debt when we was captured in Africa and brought to Egypt, also known as America. And we know that they have the Egyptian symbols here in America. They got plenty of Egyptian symbols here in America that our peoples, the obelisks. They got the obelisks. In Central Park. Man, I went up and seen them personally. The obelisk in Central Park. Man, they got a whole lot of things that is associated with ancient Egypt here in America. Why would they have all them obelisks here in America? Why would they have all them obelisks here in America? Man, I went to see King Josiah, killer, that's Nietzsche, and that's the obelisk that was what they call the Cleopatra needle. It's from ancient owned, and then it was established and built during our first enslavement in Egypt, in ancient Egypt, and then how did that Pharaoh Nietzsche caused us to go back to Egyptian religion in the book of Jeremiah, when he installed, the king that was weak, Jehoiakim and King Josiah's sons that followed his way, and then how we willingly come up off the land and went into Egypt, which showed that we didn't get taken by ships to ancient Egypt, but that was a prophecy for later on, and it come to pass when we was captured in Africa and brought to the Americas for slavery. You know, that happened. That came to pass. In a lot of things that ancient Egypt did to us, like change our names, and that was done to us here. And our name was changed. Nowhere in ancient history, when the people got enslaved, they was able to keep their culture and their identity in the East. But what they call chattel slavery, what our ancestor experienced, was the worst of its kind. Was the worst form of slavery that a captured person can go through, because their soul is took, and they install religions in us. They installed demigod worship in us, and they did a lot of things to us that ancient Egypt also did too. When ancient Egypt didn't want to let us go, that's like now America do not want to let us go, and America has been prosperous because they've been having to Israelites captive in it, serving a sentence, and America ain't been able to be destroyed for all the wickedness and so forth that it has done to the earth. But now that the Israelites finished serving our punishment, and we waking up in mass numbers, that judgment is finna come down on America, and all the plagues that America is experiencing, they refuse to associate them with the Israelites' captivity. They refuse to associate it with our captivity, you know. And it's like I'm gonna do a video on Manalik, on 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 the Amalekites. You know, I'm gonna do a video soon about the Amalekites, man, of how the Amalekites are the Jewish community Ashkenazi enemy, and then how Amalekite was our enemy also when we exited Egypt and was going into the promised land. Man, I'm gonna make that, man, about our next video for the Israelite Brotherhood. But you Israelites see that, you know, Tanakh, it is right on time when it say that the Israelites taken to Egypt in galleys. Now we know that we walked, man, we walked into ancient Egypt back in the past, but how this time we we ran into Egypt to do the Egyptian religion, and upon being captured, we was taken to Americas. And where did they use galleys, ships that have rows, where you have to row it in instead of using a sail, meaning how we fulfilled it a prophecy. And then look at this here. I want to show you Israelites this here also. Let me see. That'll be 2 Kings 20. Yes, man. So all that come to pass. Look, this is 2 Kings 25:26. And all the people, young and old, and the officers of the troops set out and went to Egypt because they were afraid of the Chaldeans. You know, the Chaldeans wasn't nothing but Ashkenazi. But you see how the people went to Egypt, and then that they didn't have to go on ships, you know, that they wasn't taken on ships, but that we willingly went into Egypt, man, to do the Egyptian religion. And then upon being captured in Africa, you know, because we know that the League of Nations, that Egypt borders was all over here in ancient Libya. You know, they got pyramids in lower Libya, and they got pyramids in the Sudan, and then Egypt borders was all over here. So we was all in them parts, and then that we eventually got captured in Africa and brought to the Americas. And then once in the Americas, especially many in these parts down here in the Caribbeans and so forth, how a ship couldn't go all the way up to the coast, and that the ship had to anchor out farther from the coast, and then they put us in galleys, and then the galleys were rolled up to the shore, and then the slaves got off like that, like this right here. So the Tanakh is going to be more accurate with describing what happened to us than the King James Version, where it just say ships. We will be taken to Egypt in ships. Yeah, it's still the same, but it's some differences. This is the difference that you can see. You can see this real plain that the slaves, you know, with galleys, and then there ain't no other people on the face of this earth been through this type of troubles where their whole identity was stripped from us, and that the curses that Prophet Moses said will be on the Israelites is identical, man, to what they call black history. Identical, man, to what they call black history. So, you know, the Tanakh is right on time. So when they try to say, well, the ships, and where are the ships? And that's another thing. When people say, Where are the ships that took y'all to slavery? Okay, easy to explain that is that the ships were cargo ships. The ships were cargo ships, and that the ships were was transporting cotton and everything, and that they didn't destroy the ships. They didn't destroy the ships. Didn't make no sense to destroy the ships because the ships was turned back into cargo ships after they had us on the plantation uh, uh, doing cotton and sugar cane and all that, and that the ships were turned into cargo ships to transport the products and the goods that the Israelites did on the plantation. How they made us pick the cotton, and the cotton was transported on the ships, exported and so forth. So that's what happened to the slave ships, is that they was converted back into merchant carrying products and so forth. So it wouldn't make no sense, men, for them to destroy the slave ship after after bringing the majority of us here, and then how the ships was turned back into cargo ships to transport goods and so forth. You know what I'm saying? Like this right here. You know, slave ships carried enslaved people from Central and Western Africa. The slaves were used and worked in the English colonies. Millions of enslaved people were forced. But you see how they had the cargo and so forth. So that space up at the top where they, held the people, man, that was just cleaned out. And then they would just put products in it, sugar cane and everything that we had grown and labored for in the Americas, or in the Caribbean and other places that they held us as slaves, that they put them on the ship instead of the slaves, and that it was turned into a cargo ships, and then they was already merchants. So you shouldn't find hardly no slave ship that they use, even though they have found some, but 99% of the ships, man, gonna be turned back into cargo ships that would take the products that we slaved on the plantation. They would take them back, men, across the waters, and then they would enjoy them up in these parts and stuff from our labor and stuff. And that's what got Europe, good and started and so forth, where they've been living a luxury life. They've been living a luxury life for a long time, is because the people from the transatlantic slave trade that was forced into labor and bondage manufactured all those goods and them products, and then they were shipped on the ships back over here, man, to these parts. Some of us say, well, when these folks gonna start having problems and not be able to live so good? I think that's on the agenda now, that they facing some hardships that they might not never be able to recover from. Every nation that enslaved the Israelites, eventually had problems coming to it. So they are not exempt. And I be trying to encourage the Ashkenazi community that if they want to live in Shem's house, if they want to stay in Shem's house, that they better help try to find a way to free us, because we have a common enemy who they call Amalek. Amalek, the Amalekites is what Ashkenazi call them, and that's supposed to be Edom's grandson. Well, the whole house of Edom got our land after we was chased out during the Babylonian wars by Ashkenazi, and they settled in Jerusalem and in our parts and so forth. And that we have to come back to our heritage. We have to come back to our heritage. And it is no way to keep us out of our heritage. And the best thing that the Ashkenazi community can do is help us get home. We're not going to worry about what happened during the transatlantic slave trade, for the simple reason is that we had it coming for for doing the Egyptian religion and so forth. But now, man, that's over with and our bondage is coming to an end, is that we have to come home and settle our land. And we'll let them stay in Shem's house in the north. And that how we got to settle these parts like Prophet Obadiah says. I got a video, man, explaining this. All right, one more time, Israelites. We was taken to ancient Egypt, Americas, and gullies, just like Tanakh said, because the boats couldn't roll all the way up to the shores, and that we had to roll ourselves in, that the slave owners made us roll the slaves in on the gullies, that that you use oars, and that we was enslaved and brung in that way. This is a message from the Israelite Brotherhood.